And so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the centuries?
So over the years, people have just called us autistic. So to prove a point, we brought an actual autistic person on the podcast. So this is my wife, and we're going to talk about home birth. But no, in all reality, we have gotten like a lot of people to ask us questions that either know us about home birth stuff because they know that we've had a couple, or people have asked me about it because, you know, with like the whole realm of preparedness and whatnot, obviously there's always the chance that you have a lot of time and you're bored, and then 9 months later you got to figure out what you're gonna do without a hospital. So yeah, that's basically it. So we asked a couple people, or we asked online, like on Instagram and Telegram and all that stuff, for any questions. So we got a couple questions, and we had a couple things that we actually did want to cover. So you want to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. So the first question, well, actually, I guess that we can...
Maybe I should talk about why I chose home birth for me, or why I got into it.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in home birth, like centric circles. Most of my friends home birth, most of our church home births. Mostly the reason why that I knew home birth before we got married was something that was on my radar is because I have a fear of hospitals. And the C-section rates are really high in hospital. Obviously, you know, it has to be in a hospital. But I was just really scared of having a C-section. That was my biggest concern, not actually giving birth. So I knew that I couldn't have a C-section if I was at home, which is not really true. You could always end up in a hospital. But that was the driving force of me wanting to birth at home, was not wanting to go to a hospital out of fear.
Yeah, because I remember that when we knew that we wanted to do things kind of naturally or you know, I guess whatever. Natural, I guess, is the word. Not to say that hospitals are completely unnatural, but we wanted to do things more holistically, I guess is the term.
It's a better term.
And I do remember, too, that we kind of loosely were like, yeah, let's do it at home and whatnot. And then I remember that because we got married, and then the following like month or two later, we found out that we were pregnant, you know, as most couples do.
As most Catholic couples do.
Yeah, as most Catholic couples do. So we were like, all right, well, let's, you know, start getting ready for it. And at the time, I remember that we were still living in my apartment. Yeah, at that point, it was our apartment. And I remember at one point, too, like you were sitting on the couch in there and you were like, I think I want to do the first one unassisted.
I remember this exactly.
And I was like, yeah, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Which was kind of a funny...
And I was already, I think, 16 weeks at that point, which if you're not familiar, a pregnancy is generally 40 weeks. So I was almost halfway through at this point, and I had no prenatal care at all, which is usually you get your first ultrasound at like 8 weeks or sooner if you are a little bit more paranoid. But I did not find my actual midwife until 20 weeks. I didn't hire her until 20 weeks, which again is halfway through your pregnancy. And by then you've already had a couple scans and some blood work and all that. And I didn't have any of that.
Yeah. And I think too that like because for me, I kind of was like, oh, you figure it out. Like because especially when you said that you want to do it unassisted, I was like, well, you know, whatever you want to do, if you read into it, you know, I'm fine with it. But I do think that it's important for men to know what's going on and have a good idea, because I think, too, that knowing what I know now is that if we were, you know, like during birth, sometimes you're not always as alert or as in I don't want to say in the right mind, but
you mean like me, the person?
Yeah, because you're dealing with something.
Well, yeah, you can be, depending on like the first birth, I was totally out of it, like not present at all. I had no idea what was going on for the most part. And then with our second child, I was more present. I think I knew a lot more. I could speak to you and I knew a lot more what was going on at the time.
Yeah, but I think that it's important regardless for, even if you do it in the hospital for men to know what's going on and know what all the best options are, because you can't always rely on your wife to make the decisions while they're going into labor.
I would argue that it's even more important when you're in a hospital setting, because
Yeah.
there's so many more options and things that can get pushed onto your wife that you might not agree with. So it's very important to be super knowledgeable on like what you don't want to happen at a hospital in case your wife gets put under or something like that. Like if she ends up in a C-section, there's a lot of things that can happen that she won't be able to advocate for herself.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically taking like power of attorney kind of deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that it's kind of, it seems like it's common too for a lot of guys to be more of the mind that they don't really want to be present for the birth, or they don't really want to get involved with it or anything like that, which I think is kind of odd.
It's such a bad take to be like, it's very rare that I would see this or hear this in these kind of circles, but it is very old fashioned, like back in, I don't know.
Back in the good old days.
Back in time, it was...
Back when we were a society.
It was typically more of a women's thing. Like, men weren't typically present for it, but it's because they were, like, out hunting for food and stuff. Like, I think it's, like, that one King of the Hill episode where Hank doesn't stay in the room with Peggy when she has the baby. That's how things...
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that? Well,
no.
That's how things used to be, and I don't really agree with that. I mean, if you'd rather some surgeon catch your baby than you, like, that's cringe to me. That's really weird. But that's what sometimes people will say is like, oh, it's a woman's space. And while I agree, it's also like, it's different now. Like, women don't really have the support that they used to. They don't have like their whole family attending their birth and like supporting them through it. If that was the case, or if you were off at war, then, things would be different. But...
Well, it's also just like a huge flex to be like, yeah, I caught my son.
Well, yeah, and you're the first person that, holds your child should be the mother or the father.
Yeah.
I don't think that there needs to be a third party in there, which, I'm not saying there shouldn't be a midwife. I'm just saying that if you have the opportunity to catch your child, you should absolutely do so.
Oh, yeah, yeah, so basically, like, once because we got married, got pregnant, and then we were
luckily in that order.
Yeah, in that order. And then we were looking for a house, which had started before we had gotten married, because the idea was that we would get married and then we'd move into a house together that I was already in for a couple weeks or months. Ran into a bunch of problems because we were trying to find houses during a very difficult time to find houses, and then we ended up getting one. I remember that we were kind of stressing to find a house because we knew that we wanted to do it at home, and our midwife even told us, like, oh, worst case, you can do it at my house. And I guess that she's got like a whole birthing setup, and she's got the whole like Gucci setup for popping out babies. And so we got into our house, got settled, and then started buying all this stuff for the birth. So we bought like...
Yeah, but I didn't start buying it until I was due, or like the week before I was due.
And that's kind of another thing too, is that we had the kind of a rough due date, which we didn't do like ultrasounds or anything really. Like we got the heartbeat, like our midwife did a thing to listen to the heartbeat to make sure it was normal. But we didn't do ultrasounds we just kind of winged it like the whole time.
Well, I think there's misconceptions with what a home birth is and what it all entails. So basically, a lot of the questions are like, what do you do with this, or what do you do with that?
What if something happens?
Well, I think a lot of people assume that home birth equals no midwife, and that's not the case. So there's a lot of different terms for midwives, like nurse, midwife, practitioner, whatever. There are midwives that work with hospitals. It really depends on what state you're in or even what country you're in. So I'm not going to go into detail about that kind of stuff. You're just going to have to look it up for your specific area. But I hired a midwife for both of the pregnancies, and she doesn't work with any sort of hospital. She can do blood work if you want. I could get ultrasounds if I wanted to, but I had no interest in those kind of things, and I just didn't feel like paying for them out of pocket. But you totally can get blood work if you want. You can get as many ultrasounds as you want. Like, my midwife never really brought it up because she knew that's not something I was interested in. And then, so you could have a wild pregnancy is a term that people use if you do no prenatal care at all, no midwife, nothing. You don't go to a hospital or anything, or you don't hire anybody. Unassisted is when you do have a midwife for prenatal care, but you choose to birth alone. And then, but basically, like, for the most part, if you're having a home birth, most people hire a midwife. And that mitigates a lot of risk and a lot of the issues that people, like what if something goes wrong, like you said, like, that's what your midwife is for. In my case, though, she didn't make it for either.
We're getting to that part.
Yeah, so we'll get there.
But yeah, so we set up everything and got everything ready, and then we had kind of a rough due date, and due dates really aren't, they're kind of an estimate. They're not like
100%.
They're not like a hard line. This is when the baby has to come out, and I think that it's you know, a lot of the times it's the case where people will end up going to the hospital on the due date, and then they're like, where's baby? Yeah, and then they'll induce or, you know, get a C-section or something like that, and it's like, well, the baby didn't want to come out for another few days, and now you've done all these additional things that, you know, weren't necessary to do.
My pregnancies both went over. I was 40 weeks and 6 days and 40 weeks and 3 days, and anything between 38 and 42 weeks is considered normal. Yeah,
and it was funny too, because I remember at one point we had two of my buddies over, and because I had drill one weekend, and so my one friend was here because, you know, we were in the same unit together, and he came over, and then my other friend came over that night, and we were all just kind of goofing off and stuff, and they were both like, hey, when's the baby due? And you're like, a couple days ago.
They were like,
yeah, they thought that it was just going to slide out randomly at some point.
Yeah, on my due date, I went to my best friend's a baby shower.
Yeah.
I went to two showers. I went to a bridal shower and a baby shower on my due date. And I'm a very private person, and I know how people act around due women, and so I had never told anybody my due date. I saw my mom that day, and she didn't know that it was my due date, because once you hit the certain days, you know, people are like, oh, like, when's it coming, whatever, and there's no way to predict that. So my biggest piece of advice for any woman having a baby is don't tell people your exact due date. Just tell them the month. Even tell them the season. Tell them what year you're expecting.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is that I think that it was a good idea, because once we had our daughter and our son, once we had both our kids, it was nice to kind of have that privacy, and people weren't like, you know, at the crack of dawn on the day that you said that they're due, asking where the baby was, or to see pictures or anything like that, and just kind of rushing you. So it was nice.
That can add a lot of stress. I know a lot of my friends have talked about that. Like I said, I never experienced that because I had the foresight not to share the due date, but a lot of my friends have been like, for the whole week from a week before their due date, they have their moms and their friends all texting them, like, hey, how's it going? When are you having the baby? Yeah. I mean, I had like vague texts from family members like, how are you? But nothing up to
Cryptic.
my due. It was very like peaceful, I would say.
Yeah. So we hit the due date, just kept riding it out, and then you went into labor. And then we went to Kroger to pick up snacks. And Target. And I remember, too, when we went to Target, I was goofing off because you were, like, in labor. And I think you had to go to the bathroom really bad.
Probably.
And you kept saying that we had to pick up something. And I just kept, like, goofing off and not doing it and trying to divert and get in the way and stuff because it was funny. and then, so we ended up, I remember we went to bed.
Well, I think by saying that I went into labor, I think we should specify that I had started contractions. I think there's a big misconception. I think movies have contributed to this, but like your water breaking, having contractions, like going into labor, people think like, I need to go to the hospital right now. And my first labor was 24 hours, which people will also hear that and think, oh my gosh, like you must have been in misery.
You were pushing for 24 hours.
Absolutely not. No, I started having contractions and the baby was born a full 24 hours later, but the contractions were very subtle at first, and like we went to the store and all that stuff. So it's, your water doesn't immediately break. You're not immediately like immobilized or anything like that. Like you can go about your day.
Freeze up.
Yeah, you can go about your day while you're in labor. It's totally doable.
Yeah, you can go clock in at the poop factory, log a full day's work. So then I remember that we woke up. Well, I woke up because I was sleeping. You weren't, and you woke me up in the like super early in the morning, and you were like, "Baby's coming," and you jumped out of bed. And I laid there and I was like, "All right." So you got into bathtub. So what our plan was as well was that we were going to set up a birthing tub and have the baby in the birthing tub, and which is basically just like a kiddie pool with really high walls and like a padded bottom.
And then you line it like with a
Yeah,
plastic liner.
yeah, and you put like a big plastic liner in it. And honestly, when we ended up doing that properly for our second kid, like it was so much more of a pain to clean out.
I won't recommend it again.
I think that next time that we have a baby, let's just install a garbage disposal in the bathtub to help clean up.
No,
easier.
the first birth was way easier to clean out.
Yeah,
because I never even made it into the birthing tub.
Yeah, so we get into the I start running water for you because the hot water like helped with contractions. You get in the tub, and then we're waiting for the midwife to show up because before we actually fill the birthing tub. And
well, because my midwife, I had warned her. My midwife just kept telling me to go to sleep. Like, I was telling her my contractions. I was keeping track of them on an app, which is pretty common. Most of my friends have done that because it's hard to keep track of, yourself. And she just kept telling me to go back to sleep. And that's why I woke up and I was like in transition, which transition is basically the point of where you have to start pushing. And it's totally involuntary. You don't think like, oh, I'm going into transition or I'm going to have to start pushing. Like, it's completely... That's part of when you kind of transition literally into that like otherworldly, like, I'm not fully here moment.
Just being chilling.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I went and made a pot of coffee because it was super
Because
early
it
in
was
the morning.
really important.
I mean, you're already in the tub. There wasn't much else I could do. And then we were telling the midwife, like, all right, you need to come now. And she was asking all these questions. And we were like, no, you need to come, like, right now. And there was a giant, like, a big blizzard that had just happened. So there was a ton of snow. And
which is actually, fun fact, it's very common for women to go into labor because of storms, snowstorms, like natural events, stuff like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Because there was that rain, it was a big snowstorm and the roof leaked.
Yeah.
That's what I remember is the night before I went into labor, the roof leaked.
Because once we moved into our house, like, we were still new in our house. We didn't know that, because they had told us, like, oh, the roof needs to be replaced, but we didn't know how dire it was. But
that was actually the worst leak we'd ever had, and we haven't had that kind of problem since then.
Yeah.
That's how bad the storm was.
Yeah, and I think that it was a lot of, like, the snow melt mixed with other stuff. I think that it was, like, raining, and then it went to storming.
I think so, too.
And, but, yeah, I just... Whenever I go to look at the pictures of... which I don't commonly look at all the pictures of when our daughter was born. But
sometimes you get like the memory notification.
Or sometimes I'll go there to look for something, and I'll see that picture of me coming out of the attic where you just see like my feet dangling out of the hole, and
then like the next photo's the baby.
yeah. There's 3 photos. There's one that's like the roof that's inside of my roof because our house is cursed, and the first time I went up there was a shingled roof that was on the like floor of the attic. And it had a pitch and everything, so I took a picture of it, and then the next picture is me going to get out of the attic, so you just see my feet dangling, and then suddenly baby. So I go and make a pot of coffee, and we're telling the midwife that she needs to show up, and I was pretty nervous, and I was kind of like pacing in the family room, because our front door like automatically leads into our family room, and we have kind of big windows on the front of our house that face the road, and she was like, oh, I'll be there in, however long. And she was, we were waiting and waiting. I see her car pull in. I open up the door. I'm helping her with her bags and stuff. We run in. You start calling for me. I don't know what to do. And our midwife is like, just go. So I run into the bathroom, and you're sitting there holding our daughter. So that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah, it was nice because I didn't get my shirt dirty.
Yeah, so I ended up catching her. She was born in a push. I mean, she was just the easiest thing I could even imagine birth. She was a lot easier than our son, that's why she's crazy, but
yeah, probably.
She came, luckily, like I knew what to do. I mean, I didn't know what to do in terms of complications, so luckily she was born perfectly fine with, but
she was also born on call, like in the water, like, because that was the thing that was kind of confusing for me, was that when you jumped up in the first thing in the morning and we're like, baby's coming, and you got out of bed,
I was scared.
Well, I felt around and the bed wasn't wet.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, your water didn't break. Are you sure that the baby's coming?
Well, so, I mean, I don't know how graphic we should get, but I didn't feel like the baby's head. So I was immediately scared because one of the biggest One thing I would get a C-section for is it's called placenta previa. That's when your placenta is in front of the cervix.
Placenta.
Okay, Varg.
The placenta.
Placenta.
That's when your
Placenta.
is in front of your cervix, and so if your placenta is born before the baby, essentially you'll bleed out, and it's actually deadly. So that's something I would get a C-section for. So that's what I was afraid is, like, maybe I was feeling the placenta and I was about to die, essentially. So I was like, well, okay, things are happening. But yes.
Sorry, I'm too busy making coffee.
So my water never broke. She was born with her amniotic sac intact, and then as soon as she, like, popped out, I guess, she like opened her arms, and it's just funny because no one else was there, so it's just like a memory I have to myself. But I catch her, and then, like, she just spreads her arms out, and it breaks, and it's like, it's very special. It's very uncommon for a baby to be born like that, and I wish someone had been there to witness it, because sometimes it feels like it wasn't even real, like it didn't even happen.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be like a good luck thing. Like, I think all these, like, really...
It's like a sailor thing, too, because it's called, like, a mermaid birth or something like that.
Well, I think that all these, like, real powerful or great people in history have been born within their... into sac.
Yeah, so... That I think that's part of what made it such an easy birth, too, is because it was kind of, like, cushioned, I guess. But,
Yeah.
so that led to very unrealistic expectations with our second about how easy it was going to be. But luckily, yeah, nothing bad had happened, that I didn't have my midwife there. So that was nice. That, like I said, set up some really high expectations for my next one.
Yeah. So then for the next one, which was born in the fall, I was trying to do the last lawn mow of the year.
And I ruined it.
And you ruined it. And
So, well, the crazy thing about that day was you started to mow the lawn, and our daughter was just puking.
Oh yeah,
everywhere.
she ended up getting really sick.
Yeah.
Like she threw up like a handful of times.
She was super cuddly, but she, at that age, still now has never been that cuddly. She was just laying on me all day.
She was very, like, down. Like, you could tell that it wasn't good. And it's rare that we put on TV or movies or anything for our kids. Well, for her, because our son still isn't old enough. But for her, I think that day we were like, all right, like, we can watch a TV show, or, Little Bear, gotta bring back the classics.
but she was just, like, laying on I was looking at these photos not that long ago because I was talking about it with my friends, and she was just laying on my belly, like, the whole day. Just would periodically just throw up on me, which is, again, super out of the norm for her. And so I guess it's actually pretty common for older children to be out of sorts like that when their mom's going into labor.
Yeah, a buddy of mine, I think they have 9 or 10 kids. And
they must be Catholic.
They are. And he said that his oldest daughter, well, the oldest is a daughter, every single one of the kids afterwards, she didn't feel good that day. Like, I think that as she's gotten a little bit older, she isn't as actually sick, but for the first few, like, she was in the same state, like, very sick and very kind of out of the norm, and which is very strange. Like, it's very odd.
It's strange, but I think kids are just really in tune with their moms, I guess, and their sibling.
Well, I think too that kids in general are really in tune with a lot of that stuff, because I think I told you the story. There was a girl that I used to work with, and she had told me the story where it was like her nephew or something, or her, like, cousin who's much younger than she is. He would always be able to guess what the baby was. Like, if somebody was pregnant, or like, he would run up to a woman who was in very, very early stages of pregnancy where she wasn't yet showing, and he'd be like, "You're pregnant, it's going to be a boy." And, like, she wouldn't even know yet. And then it would be, it would. And at one point, I think that somebody in their family was pregnant, and they asked him, like, "Oh, is it going to be a boy or a girl?" And he was like 6 or 7 at this point, and he just goes, both, and runs away and to go back and play. And they're like, all right, whatever. And it turned out to be twins.
Dang.
And one was a boy and one was a girl. So it is strange when you get into these kind of things.
That's maybe we should mention too that we didn't know the genders of either of our kids before they were born.
Yeah.
Which usually you find out through the ultrasound, but even if you want to opt out of ultrasounds, you can find out through blood tests. So it might be common for home birthers not to know the gender of the sex of the child, but that's not required. I mean, you can totally find out if you want to. I have friends who have chosen to find out and friends who've chosen not to find out for various reasons. We chose not to. Mostly because I already just had decided I didn't want to do ultrasounds, but mostly because it's kind of like a fun surprise.
Yeah, it was more fun that way, 100%.
Yeah, I think-
I would recommend it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and I think that you had said it this way before, that, you know, once because leading up to the birth, you're very excited for the birth itself. And then,
Well, you're excited for the baby.
yeah, you're excited for the baby.
You're not excited to give birth.
Yeah, well,
most
you're excited for the end result of the birth. But then once you have the baby, it's like, okay, well that's past now, and then you can look and see what the gender is, and then you can get excited for that. So like,
Yeah, it's something to look forward to after like a long, treacherous labor.
yeah. Plus, we're not creative enough to come up with like a good gender reveal party.
No,
And-
I think that stuff's kind of weird, but
Yeah.
so we just came up with a name for both genders, you know, both times, which is funny because we never really agreed with my daughter. We never really agreed on a boy name. We just never.
Mine too.
What? Oh,
My daughter, too.
Our daughter, yeah. So we never really had a boy name picked out. We were just kind of gonna wing it if it was a boy. And then with our son, we didn't really have any girl. We had one. I don't think we settled on any girl name at all.
It was kind of funny too, because for our son, we kind of had two names, and we were like, "Oh, when we see him, we'll know what it should be."
Mm-hmm.
So then when he was born, we were like, "Yeah, this is his name." But yeah, for our son, you interrupted me from cutting the grass, and that strip of the yard is still longer
Yeah.
than the rest because I haven't cut it yet because it's still kind of early.
But that's a benefit of home birth is like, I don't remember. I think you were out cutting the lawn, and I said, "Oh, like I'm getting contracted." Like they're
yeah,
starting.
you said,
And
"Come
you're
on
like-
in, the baby's coming. The
Well,
baby's gonna come."
The benefit is that you kept going a little bit. Like after I think my contraction started at like 11 a.m. And so you had either just started or whatever. Like you got most of the lawn done that day. So if you home birth, you can mow your lawn while your wife is in labor.
and make coffee.
You can't do that at a hospital.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I used to be able to before woke. Yeah, so I come inside, and at that point it pretty much was just like sit around and
Well, I needed your help with our daughter because she was so sick.
yeah. So at that point it was pretty much like watch TV, and like tend to our daughter. And it was kind of funny too because the day prior, I had just finished doing our daughter's room because we had to do like a bunch of renovations to it, and I had to build like part of a wall and paint and everything else. So we got everything moved in, her furniture, got it all set up, and then she went to sleep. And then the next day was when we were going to have our son. So that night we ended up putting her to sleep. And then so our midwife told us ahead of time that she was going to be stuck in some other birth and she couldn't make it. So her assistant was going to come and you know, be our primary provider of care.
Midwife. I mean, she's a midwife, yeah. But she's a midwife assistant typically. She's
a
like
low wife.
Yeah, she's certified though.
So yeah, she came over.
She was at our first birth. She was.
Yeah.
They both came in at basically the same time.
Which it was funny
That was the only
too.
time I'd ever met this second woman.
Yeah, and it was funny because after everything got settled with our daughter, and because it was so early in the morning, then the first thing I was like, "You guys want coffee?" They were both like, "Yep." And so we just, all three of us sat in the kitchen and like had coffee while you were sitting in the tub taking a bath. So yeah, we called them.
I don't drink coffee, so I wasn't very upset about that.
Yeah. So you were just like chugging vodka.
Yeah.
No. So we call the midwife over. She comes and checks because you're ready to pop our son out. And she's like, "Oh yeah, it's going to be a while. Just go to bed, whatever." And
This was false.
yeah, so I remember too, we were watching MASH, and I can't remember what episode of MASH, but I remember that we didn't really get to watch most of it. And then you went to bed, and then I was just like, well, I'm not going to sleep, so I was just playing video games. And then pretty late, you were like, all right, well, it's time to happen. So
No, I think I decided to take a bath. I couldn't handle it anymore.
oh yeah, that's what it was. So I run the tub for you. You get in the tub, and then
Regular bathtub.
yeah. And then at that point, I knew better, so I start filling the birth tub, which we had pre-inflated. It was so funny too because for our daughter, for our first kid, we had made, so we have it's technically a bedroom, but we have it as like our kids' playroom now. And we had that was like the ideal birthing place. Like we had these like fairy lights or whatever they're called.
It was so aesthetic. It had
it was
photos of everything we liked on the wall.
Yeah, we had like photos of us and all this stuff.
Perfect birthing room, which just goes to show that like everything on Instagram, because that's like where I learned to do that, was Instagram. It was just like a lie, because I ended up having her in the bathtub. And
you kids are always on your damn phones.
Well, I ended up having her in our dinky little bathroom.
Yeah, and so yeah, we end up filling the birth tub. And I remember, too, that I hook up this hose to the shower head in our other bathroom, and it's, like, running all through our house. And I'm going back and forth trying to like, make sure that everything's good, because it didn't seal onto the, like, spout good enough. So it was just spraying water everywhere. And, like, the whole bathroom was soaked. And I was like, oh, fuck it, I'll deal with it later. And so we filled the tub, and then I move you over into the tub, and then you're hanging out, and we're telling our midwife, like, all right, you need to come now, because you were also tracking your contractions, like the time between them.
Right, and then there's that dangerous part where, like, you can't, not dangerous, but, like, there's the end part where you just can't, like, I can't even open up the app anymore, and that's when they want to see the results, and I can't, and, like, there's nothing to communicate with them, essentially. Like, I fell asleep in the bathtub. I went in
you
there.
Did?
Yeah, I went in there to get some. I don't know how long I was in there, but I was just laying
like
down.
6 hours.
I don't think so. But the reason why water birth is so popular is because water soothes your contractions, and hot water especially. So that's why I was in the bathtub for both births before they were born, because I needed like that sense of relief, and it also helps to lay on your side. So I was laying in the bathtub, and I'm pretty sure I fell asleep because I don't remember how much time passed when I was in there. So I fell asleep, and then transition hit. And it, brought me back to my first birth. So at this point, since you had filled the tub, that's why I moved into the actual birthing tub, because I thought it would be a better experience. Yeah,
so we move you in there, and then I don't know what exactly triggered it, but you were like, all right, baby's coming now. So
that's transition. That's what you can just feel when you have to push.
All right. So yeah, we went and pushed out our son, and
well, I did. You helped, but
I told you to push.
Yeah, so
at one point, I'm, without getting too graphic.
Yeah, please.
I'm looking in the area where I'm looking in the landing zone of the baby, or the drop zone, the exfil site of the baby, and I can see like the tiniest bit of hair or like head, and I was like, it's his head. So then I tell you to start pushing. You do. And I just see his head come out. And I'm sitting there and I'm holding his head to kind of support it. And then you got the rest of him out, and he just kind of slid out.
That's what's supposed to happen. Yeah. It's not supposed to be a struggle.
It was a very odd image for me to see.
Yeah, so imagine me doing that by myself.
Yeah, it's like the angles matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, watching him come out, it definitely looked like something out of like a sci-fi alien movie, I'm not gonna lie. And then I was sitting there holding him, and it was kind of a shock of like, oh, like this is a baby. Yeah, and then the first thing you go is, what gender is it? Which obviously it's for him to decide when he gets older. So
it's a they them.
Yeah, I was like, you bigot, he doesn't know yet, he can't talk. So I look, and I'm like, oh, it's a boy. And I didn't even think at the time to look.
No, you didn't. You just handed him off to me, and then I told you it was
well,
a boy.
you had to turn around.
Yeah.
Because, we were playing Twister at the time. And so you had, like, you were in your Twister pose, and I was luckily standing up because I was spinning the wheel.
I really hope this hits the target audience, and the comments are not crazy on that.
It'll be fine. And then, yeah, so you were like, oh, what did gender know? And then yeah, so it was kind of cool that it was a boy, and I knew immediately that he was just going to be upset that he had all a couple of pink sets of clothes and all that. He was really going to throw a fit over that.
Yeah.
Which that's kind of the thing, like, that I had always thought too. It's like, oh well, I'd want to know the gender of the baby so we can like get the room ready and get the clothes ready and stuff, which
It's such a cope.
Yeah, it is. Like the baby doesn't care what they're wearing.
No, and green is gender neutral, and it's the best color.
Yeah,
so.
greens, grays, even
Yellow.
at this point, blue. Like our daughter loves blue.
Yeah.
And also too, like we just co-sleep with whatever the youngest kid is. So at this point now, like our daughter has her own room, which the target was before we had our son, which I still made
By the day.
Still made it, and then now our son sleeps in our room with us.
But even so, like all of her, like we do have a crib and crib bedding and all that. It's all just gray, you know.
Yeah, and it's not like
sad beige baby, but it's like neutral. It's it's fine.
Yeah,
or woodland themed. That's most of their stuff is woodland themed.
Yeah,
that fits both of them.
Yeah, because they're both wild.
Yeah,
wild and feral.
It's gender neutral. I mean, that's all. And gender neutral, not in like a woke way, and like I don't have to buy a bunch of new clothes for both babies and all that.
Well, yeah, because like we cloth diaper too, so our son's diapers now are what our daughter wore when she was younger. So it's he has a couple of like pink nighttime diapers, and it's like, who cares, right?
Yeah,
like,
I just laugh at him. I just point and laugh at him when I go to bed.
Call him gay.
Yeah. He cries himself to sleep because I make fun of him.
So we did it in water. Is there like a home birth that people do just like raw dog in the ground?
So the terms in like the birth community are like land birth or water birth.
We call it in the industry.
In the industry. Well, I mean, most of my friends and my church friends and my online friends, everybody, the thing that connects every mother, except for like adoptive ones, I guess, which good for you, but every mother has given birth. So every woman at some point has told another woman.
Test tube baby scientists.
Well, they're not real. Every woman has told another woman their birth story. It just always comes up. It's just something that connects all of us, which is really beautiful. Even if you have had different, hospital births or whatever, we all can relate in that way.
Do you remember that lady when we went to Alaska?
Oh, she was cool.
So after we got married, we went to Alaska for a week for our honeymoon, and we were staying outside of Anchorage, and the town that we were staying in is like 30 or 40 minutes of a drive. And so every single time that we'd be passing, either to go to Anchorage or to come back, there was this place that was kind of on this hill right alongside of the highway that we were on. And so you have the ocean on one side, or a bay or sea or whatever, and then you have this like hill on the other side with this like really just shitty looking antique store. And
it was tourist trap.
Yeah,
there were signs were like mine for gold.
Yeah,
pan for gold.
Yeah, exactly. There was so much stuff outside,
and we passed it so many times before we were like, well, I guess we should go in.
Yeah, we had nothing keeping us. We had no kids bitching in our ears. So we go inside and we're talking to this lady, and she was the one that ran the place, and we told her that we were on our honeymoon there and all that. And I don't know how exactly it came up, but we told her that we wanted to do home birth and all that, and she was like, oh, that's how I did it and stuff. And she was saying too that like for her one kid, she had to take like a couple shots before
of whiskey. It's not like
I didn't know it was vodka.
Oh yeah, but like not like medical shot, like shots of liquor.
Yeah. She was like, oh yeah, my midwife told me to like have a shot or two to calm my nerves, because at that point, like, it's not going to get to the baby.
I mean, honestly, at that point, it's probably fine.
Yeah, you'd have to have like a flat, watered down Truly.
Well, the baby's fully developed at that. Not that I'm encouraging it in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying the baby's developed. They're not going to come out looking like an Irishman.
Yeah, I mean, I had my first beer through an umbilical cord, so.
Your mother's a very nice woman.
Yeah, she is. So yeah, we. How did this come up? Oh yeah, water versus land.
So I have a couple friends that have done home birth. So water...
Just straight on the hardwood floor.
No, well, so one of the things that my midwife has, because they provide you, a good midwife provides you with a list of things to have at home. One of them was a shower curtain to put on the bed in case you give birth on the bed. So the benefits of water birth, obviously, like I said, like it's comforting and it's relaxing with your muscles and your contractions and all that. But also it's just the easiest cleanup, because you can just go down... things go down the drain. And plus it was really nice because I take a bath postpartum, like an herbal bath, and you're
They dropped this thing. The first time I saw that floating in the tub, I was like,
it's like a big tea bag, essentially.
Yeah, it's a giant like brown tea bag filled with these herbs that you throw in the tub. But I walk in because they had to pull the placenta out of the tub, and there was like blood clots and placenta. There was like blood clots and all this weird stuff floating around in the tub. Baby poop was all over. Colostrum, is that what it's called?
That's the milk.
Oh yeah.
Meconium is
Meconium.
Yeah, our daughter was like, both of my kids were just really poopy after they were born.
Yeah, they still are.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff floating in the tub. We just let it go down the drain.
Yeah, it's really nice to be able to just drain it and then.
That's why we need to do the garbage disposal in there.
I'm not disposing my placenta.
It's like in Seinfeld when he was like making salad in the shower.
I don't like Seinfeld.
What do you mean?
Anyway, what was I even saying? Oh,
I don't care.
So I take an herbal bath, and it's really nice to not have to move out of the tub because you're in a really vulnerable state. Like when I did get up to go to the bathroom the first time, like I almost passed out on the toilet, which is totally normal and fine. Like
me every time.
Well, you go through a lot, obviously. So I just drank some lemonade and then I was fine. But it's really nice to be in the tub, drain everything out, clean everything up, and then take your bath. And it's funny, too, because I have photos of each of my baths, like, from behind, so you can just see the baby. But the water looks like passion tea. Like, it's very... I don't know if you know those photos, but it's, like, it's very red. And I've shown my friends those photos because they're, safe for work. Like, I'm not even in them practically. And, like, a lot of my friends, like, other like, natural-minded friends have been like, oh, that was a really bloody birth. I'm like, no, that's my herbal bath. Like,
yeah.
So if you see I think a lot of times, like, I've seen videos of home births, which I think it's kind of whatever to post your home birth video online, but it's not blood for the most part. It's usually like an herbal bath that they're in. So people are kind of have a weird conception about that. That's actually just our water, our city water.
No, it's not. You can see crap floating around.
That's not the herbal bath.
I don't know what that is.
That's before everything. That's the second that she was born.
My feet in our shingled attic.
Anyway, yeah, you can give birth outside of the water at home. It's just, that's the herbal bath. You can give birth outside of the water. I have no experience with it, obviously. I don't see why you would, because what is that?
A toilet with icicles sticking up really far.
Great. I don't have any experience with it. I wouldn't recommend it because I just feel like the cleanup would be kind of insane and I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, so... Yeah, and so when we did it in the tub, like... It sat in the room for a couple days.
Because the liner slipped because we had to set everything up by ourselves. So the midwife was like, oh yeah, don't worry,
Oh, we didn't even get to that part. Oh yeah, we did. So the midwife was running a little late. So
so we texted the midwife, hey, it's a boy.
Yeah, and then she was like, I'm 3 minutes away.
I think she felt really bad because this was the second time they had missed it. So I really like my midwife. I just don't. It'd be cool to have someone there. Because it's kind of like we cursed ourselves because I remember that day where I was like, oh, I think I want to do unassisted. And you're like, no. And then every birth has been pretty much unassisted aside from my prenatal care.
Which it's honestly like the cost of the midwife is almost worth like all the cleanup.
It is, yeah. So with the first birth, she did all the laundry. Like she even took some of my towels home. They ran the baths for me. And so there's postpartum care involved too. So if you don't hire a midwife, you're sacrificing your prenatal care and your postpartum care. So she did and also, so I forgot to mention too, for my prenatal visits, she came to my house, which is invaluable to me. I didn't have to drive to some hospital or anything like that. I didn't have to go to some, anywhere, especially when...
You didn't have to go to the New York tunnels to get your, your ultrasound.
Well, and especially since I had my daughter, my daughter came to know the midwife and really enjoy her company, but I didn't have to worry about dragging my daughter anywhere else. I didn't have to worry about meeting appointments. I've heard from friends that, prenatal appointments are, 5 minutes. You spend an hour in the waiting room, they see you for 5 minutes, and then you're done. So my prenatal appointments just consisted of her taking my blood pressure, a urinalysis stick or something like that, where, she tests my urine to see, my blood sugar and all that, and then, the baby's heartbeat. And she would do belly mapping to figure out the position the baby's in, because obviously you want to avoid the baby being in breech. And which
is when they're flipped feet first.
Feet first, yeah. Which you can birth at home. That's often a misconception. So one of the reasons why I was so afraid of having a C-section was because when you are in a hospital setting, if your baby is breech, you're going to get a C-section because they're not trained, which is, a modern thing. They're not, doctors and OBs are not trained in breech birth anymore. I just had a friend who had a breech presenting baby, and so her baby was breech. She flipped the baby because there are ways to flip the baby. I forgot what it's called, but you can either do
stick both hands up there and
no,
twirl it
no,
around
no.
like a clown juggling.
No, they can either there's it's like yoga almost, like things that you can do to flip the baby yourself, or there's a procedure where they kind of just move the baby around in your belly using their hands, which is crazy.
You just do a bunch of somersaults until the baby's in the right
something
spot.
I can't remember what it's called, but so her baby moved, and then when her labor started, they went to the hospital because she had planned a hospital birth, or birth center or something like that. But and then when she got to the hospital, he was breech again, and she, at that point, I think they said to her, like, we don't have anyone who's trained in that, or we have someone who's trained or has never done it before. And at that point, you have to weigh your risks. Like, do I want someone who's never had done a breech birth before, or do I want to do the C-section? And she chose the C-section, which I wholeheartedly understand because there are risks associated with breech birth, but I think there's even more risk associated with someone who doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So she chose that option, and it was really, it was a really heavy option to weigh because once you have a C-section, there are risks to having further births. So that's why I was so scared. Obviously, having a C-section is a major surgery that most people downplay. I'm pretty sure C-sections or cesareans are like the number one surgery in the country. I might be making that up, but it's
sounds good enough for me. I'm going to tell people that.
It's a really big deal, and it's something that should be avoided. It's because it's a major surgery. Her recovery for that one was a lot worse than her standard delivery for her first child, and it's horrible. It's something that should be avoided at all costs. And when I hear people are doing elective C-sections for things like that are they just want to do one, it just drives me insane because...
Is that like a popular thing with celebrities? Because they...
It's in Brazil, actually. A lot of Brazilians will just opt to get a C-section because they think it's easier for you to recover, which is absolutely not the case.
They're worried of it interfering with the butt lift.
Yeah, that too. But that's a reason why to avoid hospitals, because the cascade of interventions where you get an epidural or the induction doesn't work, and then somehow you end up in a C-section that should have never happened. So I don't really know where this started, but that was I think it started.
Because breech.
Oh, breech, yeah. So that's something I asked.
Started with somersaults.
That's something that I asked my midwife when I interviewed her. So I interviewed 2 midwives before I hired. I interviewed 2 midwives total, and then I ended up with mine. And I asked them, how comfortable are you with breech birth? And your midwife should be comfortable with breech birth.
Yeah, because I remember the one that you interviewed, that they were like, oh, we might have to go to the hospital.
Yeah, and I was like, no, I'm not. Because, something to keep in mind is, if you hospital transfer, so if something happens at your birth and you have to transfer to a hospital, midwives are not going to give you your money back. So you might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 grand in the hole with your midwife, and then paying your hospital fees as well. So these are things to consider when you have a home birth. I'm not saying that home birth is right for everybody, but we didn't have medical insurance at the time, so it was cheaper to hire a midwife out of pocket than it would have been to go to the hospital out of pocket.
Nah, we're not paying hospital bills.
Yeah, well, yeah, so it would have been still cheaper. I mean, I guess unless you ignore them, but it's something to consider. That's why I have some friends that have chosen birth centers or hospitals because they couldn't afford the midwife fees out of pocket, and I think a lot of insurances don't cover midwives. Again, this is all going to depend on your state, and even I just learned today from a friend that in New Mexico, all pregnant women are required to take a syphilis test.
Really?
Yeah, 3 times throughout your pregnancy, because New Mexico has the highest rates of syphilis or something like that. So you have to take it. So there's really, really regional rules. In certain states, you can't birth at home with a midwife before 37 weeks or something like that. So,
isn't 35 safe?
I think
38 is safe to have a kid, or
38 is the 38 to 42 weeks is the standard, but you can still safely give birth at 36, 37 weeks, maybe even 35 weeks. But legally, our midwife wouldn't have been able to attend anything before 36 weeks, I think.
Oh, okay.
So, which, I'm a late birther anyway, so I'm not really worried about that.
Procrastinator.
Yeah, basically, but so yeah, home birth, there's a lot of things to consider, like the finances of it, or if you're high risk or not. High risk being, unfortunately, if you've had a C-section, you're considered high risk, you can always consider a VBAC, but your providers are going to want to, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to find someone. So that's why it's really important to interview a midwife and find things that you're comfortable with. Ask them how they, will they come to your house? That's a big thing for me. I would not hire a midwife who wouldn't do her prenatals at my house, because for the next midwife, at that point, I'll have 2 kids. I'm not dragging 2 kids to a prenatal, anything like that. So it's important to find a midwife that you really like. I knew, I went to her house for the appointment versus a business. She runs everything through her house, so that made me feel comfortable. I just really liked her. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be hiring her again, just because she wasn't there.
She called no-showed, the point of the whole deal.
Yeah, so I really get along with her. I really prefer hands-off birth anyway, so everything worked out for me. But if you are someone who needs more support or wants more help, I guess, then you need to find a midwife that works with you, because you're paying them a lot of money. They should do exactly everything that you want.
Yeah, and there's benefits to having the midwife other than just. You good?
Yeah, I'll survive.
There's benefits to having the midwife other than just catching the baby or being there for the baby, which it's kind of funny too, because when we think about it, we were just saying earlier that the husband should be there to catch the baby, and that. Or, the husband should be able to catch the baby because it's a good... I would agree, it's a good experience and all that. But I don't know, it's funny, we're saying all this stuff, and it's still we should still have a midwife. Yeah. So, because somebody had asked, too, if your wife is high risk and you don't want to go... You don't want to do it just at home, but then you also don't trust the hospitals... The birthing center is kind of the middle ground, right?
Right. So I don't know a lot about birthing centers just because it's nothing I ever looked into, but I have had friends who've birthed at birthing centers who've had great experiences. It essentially is a perfect middle ground. Sometimes they're linked to a hospital, sometimes they're not, but they're all midwives. Again, there's different distinctions between nurse, midwife, and all that kind of stuff. But they want to do things holistically. I think a lot of times they either don't have epidurals to offer or they prefer not to. The rates of C-sections at birthing centers are a lot lower, or the rate of having to transfer to a C-section is a lot lower. The rate of induction's lower. They have birthing tubs, more comfortable rooms. I think birthing centers are a great option. I think sometimes you have to consider the insurance aspect of it. Again, we don't know about that personally, but if you...
We have insurance now, but...
Well, I just mean, I've never looked into it. It's something I never considered. I never considered the hospital or a birthing center. I always knew we were going to birth at home.
Yeah.
Because I have no risk factors. I had nothing to really be worried about. I think, there are some risk factors that I think are kind of blown out of proportion, but if you feel like you're at risk, or if you're told you're at risk, you should probably consider it.
Yeah, our midwife told you that you could birth a Mack truck.
Yeah, I was born for this.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about it. There are things that can pop up during pregnancy, like gestational diabetes or preeclampsia. That's basically...
What are those things?
So gestational...
You have to realize you're talking to a bunch of autistic men who only know guns.
Well, gestational diabetes is diabetes that just presents during your pregnancy, and then for the most part, after you have the baby, it goes away or it gets better. Something... I think the fear with that a lot of times is they might push you into a C-section because they think that your baby's going to be too big for you to birth, because your baby's probably going to be a little bit bigger if you have diabetes, but you can manage your blood sugar. And I think the whole your baby's too big for you to birth thing is always a myth. Your body is not really going to produce a baby that you can't birth. I mean, my grandpa was I'm not even kidding, 18 or 19 pounds when he was born.
Didn't he set a world record?
I don't. Well, he's Sicilian, so who knows? He's probably the fattest baby in Sicily at the time. But my great grandma probably had gestational diabetes. I mean, she was probably eating pasta every single day, every single meal. And she probably had
I wonder what that would be like.
And then preeclampsia is high blood pressure, essentially during your pregnancy, which I've had a friend have that. And I don't really know the risks associated with that. The thing is that you have to realize is you're going to have to do research regardless of if you're having hospital, home, or birthing center birth. There are going to be things that are going to come up. There's a million things that you could have during your pregnancy. There's HG. I don't remember the exact term of it, but it's...
HGTV.
Yeah. You're looking at homes.
You can
the
only
whole
look at
pregnancy.
houses with
Yeah.
your job as a butterfly breeder, and you have a budget of $6 million.
Yeah, an ant farmer. But so that's like really bad morning sickness. Basically, that you're basically bedridden. So there's a lot of things that can happen during pregnancy that I've just been really fortunate not to experience. Like same with like complications during birth. Like you can hemorrhage and you can have all this stuff, but that's why.
Well, there was the one girl that you know, and like their baby was born.
Oh, yeah.
And all of his intestines were outside of his body.
Yeah, he was born with organs outside of his body. And fortunately, she had a really amazing midwife who she keeps recommending to me. Not that I need one right now. But so the baby was born with... And she had ultrasounds. She had very standard prenatal care. Like standard in terms of like hospital, prenatal care. And they didn't catch it. So that's part of the reason why I guess I should share that why we didn't do ultrasounds. Because it's kind of a... controversial thing. There's so many things that you can miss on ultrasounds that it's not really worth it for me to get. And there's so many things that they'll say like, oh, the baby has Downs, would you like to abort? And obviously I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to abort my child, so I don't really want to have those conversations. So yeah, she had all of her regular prenatal care, and he was born with organs on the outside of his body. So what her midwife did was wrap him in saran wrap and sent him off to a hospital. They drove to a hospital, and then I think he had to get flown to another hospital. But because her midwife was there and was super qualified and calm and knew what to do, he turned out perfectly fine. He's our daughter's age, and he's I don't know what kind of scarring he has.
Did they go to our church or something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He's perfectly fine, but if they had not had a midwife there, I don't know how things would have ended up. There's so many things that you can and cannot prepare for. So you should have a basic understanding of like what things can go wrong, like a cord prolapse or a rupture or anything like that. Things that I'm not even really well versed in because I've just been fortunate enough to be ignorant and get my way through things.
So what was our safety plan when we had our kids?
Oh, we didn't have one. We had absolutely no safety plan because my safety plan was my midwife. So that's why moving forward I probably won't hire her, because even though I want her to be totally hands off, if she was there I probably would have had her on the other side of the room. It's still important to have one and have someone. Granted, they did show up like a minute afterwards with both of them. So if something was wrong, I guess it probably would have been fine. But it's not to say like bad things can't happen. Bad things happen at the hospital or at home. It just depends on what risks you're willing to take and what you want your birth outcome to look like. Like so, I have a friend who had a negative home birth experience, and I think about it, and it's something that people kind of act like. There's two sides to the story. Sometimes people say that they suppress like good home birth stories, or they suppress the bad ones because everyone tries to, it's like the cool thing to do. And then there are people that say that, there are people that try to discourage it. Like when I was still working when I was pregnant with our first child. And, I said, oh, I'm going to do a home birth. And there's this woman who was like, I broke my tailbone when I had my baby. What would have happened to me? And, there's always people that are going to be like, oh, I would have died. You could die at home and you can die at the hospital. It happens. I'm not saying that birth is totally risk-free. That's never going to be the case.
And it never has been the case.
Right,
and the thing, too, that always kept me sort of grounded was that people have been doing this since the beginning of time. Like, it's literally the only way that people have been doing, having kids for forever. And people can say that there's still the, high infant mortality rates in olden days and all that stuff, but
a lot of that was just doctors not washing their hands.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is I think that the infant mortality rates went up when hospitals started becoming more regular, and then they went down as people started to figure things out.
Mm-hmm. I think they're actually going back up right now.
Oh, really?
There's a lot of stuff that, like I said, I really don't peek my head into. I'm in and out of that kind of stuff, but
yeah.
I know the C-section rate is up, and I know that there are a lot of things that can happen with that, and it's just giving birth is not inherently dangerous or not dangerous. It's just something,
Well, I remember too that the I can't remember if it was right before we had our daughter or our son, but I went to my parents' house. And you stayed home because you were like we were close to having one of our kids, and whatever, you stayed home because you weren't feeling well. So I went to my parents' house, and like some of my other family were there, and my aunt was like, "Oh, that's that's the way that it should be done," because they were kind of asking about it. And I think that it was before our daughter, because my mom was kind of skeptical at the time.
Yeah, she was probably the most skeptical out of our
Yeah,
family.
and she
Or
was
at least the most vocal about it.
yeah, she was like the peak, like, what if something happens? And
Yeah,
that
she's a
you get
boomer,
that so
I mean.
much. Yeah, it's like the boomer mentality. But she was asking about something, and I was like telling her, like, this is what we'll do with this case, this is what we'll do in this case. And my aunt was like, well, I think that that's the right way to do it. Like, you guys are doing it the right way. And my mom was like, really? And she goes, yeah. She said, like, Native American women used to just squat in a field and pop them out or something. It was a very odd comparison. But,
Yeah.
That was kind of the thing that kept me sort of confident that everything was going to be going good, is that, we don't live in a cave. Maybe a cave's roof wouldn't leak if it was good enough, but we don't live in a cave, and we have modern amenities, and we aren't that far from a hospital. If something does, happen, God forbid.
That's part of your safety plan that you should have, is like, okay, that's something that my friend who had a negative home birth experience, she did a lot of, looking back and realizing, like, it probably wasn't the best bet for her because she's very rural, so she's very far from a hospital. That's something you have to consider. If you're an hour or so from a hospital, are you comfortable birthing at home if something goes wrong, essentially?
Yeah.
If you are not, I mean, that it's okay to birth in a hospital. So I think somebody mentioned on, when you asked, like, what did he say? The guy who was talking about, like, the hospital hate, basically.
Oh.
So I think it goes both ways. I think it's a more modern thing to be very anti-hospital, but I think there's also, like, a savior complex. Like, you'll hear women saying, like, I would have died if I wasn't at a hospital. But so many of that, so it's like, well, what happened? Tell me exactly what happened. And it'll be like, oh, I was induced. There you go. That was the start of your problem. You should not, like, I'm not saying inductions are not necessary for certain things, but a lot of times hospitals will be like, well, you've been here a while, let's just induce you. And that's when things happen.
It ends up saving costs too.
Yeah.
And once you realize too that, like, don't get me wrong, there's always reasons to go to the hospital, and there's always the thing where it's like, oh, I have an issue, I need to go to the hospital. And even like if we do like training events, we look at where the closest hospitals are. We don't look at where the closest, like, birthing centers are, wound centers. But we figure out where the closest hospitals are as part of our emergency plan in case something does go wrong. But I forget what I was gonna say.
I don't know either.
Well, we were talking about negative birth, going to the hospital.
Somebody said, like, why it's popular to hate on hospitals and medical procedures now. So it's not that people are hating on hospitals, it's that we're realizing that it's unnecessary. A lot of unnecessary things happen to women when they go into a hospital.
Oh, I remember. I was going to say, because you had brought up how there's the start of a lot of problems is induction, and regardless of if you're more on the pro-hospital side or more on the negative, like more on the anti-hospital side, hospitals are still for-profit institutions in the U.S. Like it, and when you go outside of the U.S. where you have more of universal or whatever healthcare, where it's not a for-profit place, there is still a profit that the hospital makes to some degree, but also, like, in that case, you're almost looking at a worse experience because you have much longer wait times, and because one of your friends is Canadian and had, like, a terrible experience because of the Canadian health system.
Most of my Canadian friends have had worse experiences birthing than my American friends because the midwifery. That's yes.
Caught a midwife.
Somebody in the Telegram was saying, like, how hilarious it is that midwifery is pronounced that way, but yeah, that's how you say it. Midwifery in Canada is very different because you can home birth in Canada, but every midwife is associated with the hospital, or I might be wrong, but that's what I've gathered. There's no like my midwife doesn't work for a hospital. All of the ones
Your midwife?
Shut up. All of them in Canada do. So your options are a lot more limited. I have had friends risk out for things that wouldn't risk me out here. Something like my friend risked out because of a heart condition they suspected of their daughter. that didn't actually come to fruition. Like after that ultrasound, they found out that it wasn't true, but she still had risked out, so she could not do a home birth in Canada unless she chose to do unassisted. So I feel for my Canadian friends because it just seems like not a very good experience at all. I've had Canadian friends have good births, but granted, I just think that system is really broken. I would be really unhappy there. But there are ways to do. It's not being anti-hospital. It's being anti-intervention. Because there's also things you have to consider after birth, like, I don't know, babies being switched at birth. What about that article that came out a couple years ago of a nurse who admitted to purposefully switching babies at birth? That's not fiction. That really happened.
Yeah, and it happens a lot more than you think too. Even just the other day, we were looking for something to watch because we finished the show MASH. So
which is a tragedy.
We were looking for something to watch, and there was a whole documentary about how there was a woman who would intentionally switch babies at birth.
Yeah, I think that's probably the woman in the article.
Yeah, and it's not like...
But she's not the only one.
Yeah, it's not an isolated case. Like, it happens by mistake, too. It's not always, like, a nefarious thing.
It happened to my uncle. He wasn't switched... Like, they brought my aunt a girl. Or they brought my grandma or something, like, a girl, and she had birthed a son. And so, like, obviously that was pretty easy to catch, but, I mean, it's like that that Office episode where he had the two Asian girlfriends or whatever, and so he had, like, put a marker on one. Like, babies look similar. I mean, especially...
Yeah.
If you have a C-section and you don't see the baby, they could easily get switched. So, granted, nurseries aren't very common in hospitals anymore where you put the baby and then, like, you get to sleep on your own.
Well, even if because don't they take the babies away sometimes for, like, testing and stuff?
Sometimes, yeah. So you have to be very on guard. Like, you just had birth as a woman and you're, like, sleep deprived, so, but then you have your husband who also probably hasn't been sleeping because he's been in the hospital a couple days. So between the two of you, you've had no sleep, but someone has to keep an eye on the baby at all times. That's not a very peaceful environment to bring your kids into, and that's not a very, like, it's just not good for anybody involved. And then there's things that you have to, like, if you are concerned about vaccines, you have to worry about that. They give, there's this thing, it's called, like, eye goop, essentially eye ointment that they give, they put on babies' eyes at the hospital for hepatitis or something like that, for an STD, which obviously for any married couple having a child is not a concern, but because it's routine care, you have to decline that. So, and there's other things too that you'll have to decline, and which most people, a lot of people, if you're not into, like, holistic health or anything, just, like, trust everything the hospital says, which I don't agree with. I'm not anti-medical establishment, but I'm anti not, advocating for yourself. And there's other shots and vaccines and everything that they do at birth or even, like, circumcision. Like, there have been babies that have been circumcised without the consent of their parents, and that's irreversible. And so I don't want to be on guard after I have a baby. I want to be in bed. I was in my own bed after both my kids within an hour of having birth, and I had my own daughter there, with our son, which is just amazing. And granted, I think a lot of this really I think COVID changed the world in so many ways, because, like,
now I can't leave the house without wearing a mask.
Well, there are women who had to give birth wearing a mask, like that.
Yeah, no, that's
that should
crazy.
have never ever happened.
And that was the nice thing about our midwife was, like, I don't even know if she asked about vaccines or anything, but
she never mentioned it.
Yeah, and it wasn't something that she ever brought up or cared about or anything like that.
And which is, if you want to get vaccines, that's fine. You can home birth and get vaccines if you choose to. You can still have normal pediatrician, like, appointments and all that. And that's something I kind of touched on, like, my postpartum care. Is my midwife came at, like, 1 day, 2 days, like, a week or something. She gave me 6 weeks of care, and, like, she did my son's both of my kids' hearing tests to make sure they're not deaf. Check the heartbeat, all that kind of stuff, weigh them, measurements and all that. And there's really not that much you need to do, postpartum. But she checked on me and, like, my healing and all that. And it's that kind of care is really worth it to me. So I don't think that I would not choose a midwife in the future.
Yeah. Plus, she took care of, like, the Social Security card and the birth certificate and all that stuff.
So she did all of that for us. And that's a big thing too in your kind of circle, I think. And I've seen posts about it online about, like, choosing not to get your child's social or their birth certificate. And you can totally file for that if you choose not to have a midwife. So if you chose not to have a midwife, you would have to get some sort of proof of pregnancy. So, like, I have had friends who have chosen not to have midwives at all. And even a chiropractor, you can go see a chiropractor and they'll be like, okay, you were pregnant at this day. Which is, if you don't have that, it's very difficult to prove that that child was yours. But I really don't think it's smart not to register your child for a social or a birth certificate, because...
You're just setting them up for failure later in life.
And resentment. I mean, because when they turn 16 and they're like, I want a job, I want a license, you're like, oh, sorry, you don't exist in the state of... In the country that we live in. You're not real. And that might not be...
I think a lot of people take it too far, like past the point of diminishing return, of not wanting to be on record or have things on paper, and
too Ted K pilled.
Yeah, like you watched the documentary too many times or read the manifesto, and you're like, oh no, I'm going to set up my kid for failure.
There's really no benefit. I mean, you can watch any like ex-Amish story and listen to how difficult it was for them to prove their existence, to get a job or a license, and it's silly to me. Like you're just setting them up, like you said, you're setting them up for failure. Like, the state knows that you exist. Big deal. Like, now you can do things that a normal person can do. So
yeah, I don't really think that whole thing with them knowing that you have kids and stuff like that is really a whole big thing. Plus, like, if you pay taxes, you get tax breaks because of having kids. If you don't have the Social Security number, you can't.
I don't get my Gibbs.
Yeah, you don't get your Gibbs back. But anybody that has like a standard job, where they're like, okay, here's your W-2, you have to fill out your tax forms, automatically, like, I don't know, that's like a whole nother rabbit hole.
Yeah, I don't want you have to. I mean, dealing with Secretary of State or any government.
Yeah, why would you wish that on anybody, let alone your kids?
I want to save my kids from as much trouble at the DMV as possible. I don't want them to have to deal with that. I want them to be able to have independence, get a job, go get driver's licenses, and do things that a normal person would do. If that's your thing, then by all means, but I don't recommend it. But that is a really big benefit. I've had some friends who've had to file everything themselves, and it's not impossible. It's just kind of a pain. And so that's when my midwife visits the day after birth, that's like mainly what she's doing, is like verifying details, my name, or things like that, things that go on birth certificates, the child's name, and just filing everything for me. And then she goes, okay, see you later.
Yeah.
And it's really nice because I just get the soch in the mail a little while later and all that.
Yeah. I mean, because going back kind of to like the thing at hospitals where they'll ask you to do certain things, isn't there like a K shot that's really
there's vitamin K that is for, so I believe the vitamin K is to stop, or it's like to help with blood clotting, I guess, which is basically, I believe that it's primarily for circumcision because it's a big wound inflicted on an infant, and so you need to make sure that their blood will clot so they don't bleed out. So I think if you don't circumcise, you really don't need it. Or I believe that it's best for like traumatic births, where you have to use like vacuum and stuff like that. And so
vacuum.
Yeah. So
there's like Dyson the baby out.
Yeah. So if the baby gets stuck for whatever reason, they have to either like vacuum the baby out or give you an episiotomy, which is when they cut your birthing area essentially, or forceps to help guide the baby out. And these are really intense interventions. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, a baby getting stuck, there are risks. So much of birth is just risk versus reward, essentially. Like, I think my sister they used to vacuum on my sister. She's fine. Her head's normal, normal shape and all that. So a baby getting stuck, it can be really dangerous because you can have like shoulder dystocia, which is when like the shoulder gets out of place, I think.
Dislocation.
Just something like that. No, dystocia is a word. I just don't know what it means.
Oh.
Or, if they lose, I don't know. But so there's risks, obviously, that you have to look into. But I think episiotomies are really crappy because you're cutting an area of skin that's supposed to tear naturally anyway. And so you have to heal from a whole new different like type of wound that's unnatural.
So what happens if you're doing a home birth and the baby gets stuck?
So I've had a friend who had an episiotomy at home. Midwives can do that. I really don't know. That's something that I haven't looked into. That is, you have to do your own type of research with what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with.
It was revealed to me in a dream that our children will not get stuck.
I can, I'm not worried about having a kid that's going to not be able to come out. Like, our kids have been normal sized. I think they were both basically around 8 pounds, which is very average. But even if they were larger, I really don't think I'd have an issue. If I did, then that's why I have a midwife.
A 40-pound child.
A midwife is going to figure it out. I mean, that's what they're there for. That's what you pay them for. So
Yeah. Yeah, and so, because I don't know, like, what normal hospital prices are. Like, if you have good insurance and stuff.
So that's something that I was going to mention when you were talking about, like, for profit. So let's say a regular vaginal birth is 10 grand, 15 grand. A C-section can be like 100 grand. That's why it's so encouraged. Or the good thing about a C-section for doctors is you can schedule it. You can say, okay, on December 23rd, you're going to get a C-section instead of possibly giving birth on Christmas when the doctor doesn't want to be at the hospital. And some people say, oh, that's a cope, or doctors don't think that way. But the most popular there's something like the most popular days to give birth are like a couple days before holidays, because they're scheduling C-sections for those days. It's a very recognizable pattern that the day before Thanksgiving or the day before, 3rd of July is a popular day to have a baby, because doctors want the holiday off. That's like,
yeah, I mean, they're people too, right? Like, they want to hang out with their family.
Yeah, and it fits easily into their schedule. Like, okay, let's do the C-section. Let's bang them out, essentially, and then we'll know exactly when the baby's going to be born.
Well, that's like for us. We didn't know when our kids were really going to be born.
No.
Like, we were basically just waiting.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, both times I had to tell my boss at work, like the first time when I think it was like the day before, I was like, yeah, it's definitely going to happen soon. And it was a Thursday that I told him I wasn't coming in, so I still had Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, so that way, like, we knew that was going to happen within those few days, but it was still like a lot of guesswork. And then the second time I think that the day before
he was born on Sunday, so you were already off work.
That's what it was.
And then you just said, like, you weren't going to come in on that Monday, and she was born on, so, that was actually nice that he was born on a weekend.
Yeah. Would have been nice if I could have gotten the lawn mowed.
Well, there's always next time.
Yeah, that's true, with the riding lawnmower. No, but it's a lot of guesswork. And so taking that guesswork out when you're, busy with a million other things to do and different operations and things like that. I mean, it makes sense from their perspective of time management and efficiency too.
It's just why I disagree so heavily on it. I don't think surgeons should be the primary people taking care of pregnant women. I don't think someone who's surgically trained should be your like an OB. I just don't think that. I think midwives should be the primary care for everybody, even for high-risk women, because it's
all they do.
Right, the person, doing your birth should only be able to do birth. And I guess that's like what OBs are trained in, but they're also trained in other things, I assume. I don't know. I've never met an OB I've never seen an OB in my life, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I mean, that was kind of the nice thing about getting a midwife, is knowing that our midwife, like, I mean, she delivers 3 or 4 kids a week. Like, she's pretty busy.
She's a bit overscheduled, I'd say.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where that she knows at this point what she's doing,
right?
Versus, somebody who potentially could have lied to get through, or cheated to get through medical school, and then they haven't had a good birth experience.
Like my friend's experience, where the on-call doctors had never done breech. And I know my midwife, because I asked her that she was really comfortable with breech experiences, and something to ask too is how comfortable they are with twins. Because
you can't interview your doctor,
right? It just depends on, like, who's on call. Like, you'll have your own OB, but if they're on call or if they're on vacation, like, my midwife wouldn't take anybody who's going to be born around the time that she has a vacation planned or something like that. So, I don't remember what I was saying.
Your midwife, how our midwife wouldn't take anybody that was on vacation.
Right. Well, and so what I was going to mention though was that twins is like. Twins at home is kind of a controversial thing as well. I know lots of moms who've had twins at home, and I asked my midwife what her comfort level with that is, because I don't have a family history of twins, but, things can happen.
Just left-handed kids.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't want to be, like, switched into, if you hire a midwife and then all of a sudden you're pregnant with twins, they're like, oh, I can't take that anymore, or something like that, which... It's just things that you need to consider. I think my midwife is very, very well experienced. She's been doing it a very long time. But yeah, she's cool. I do like her.
Yeah.
There's just other options sometimes.
Yeah. So then after you have the kid, what's like the postpartum? Because like for both our kids, I took 2 weeks.
Luckily.
So what's like the ideal postpartum kind of care
I
or
would
something?
say for husbands, take off as much time as you feasibly can and affordably can. I mean, don't be a workaholic. Don't think about how quickly you can go back to work, because it's not only are you helping your wife, but that's the time for you to bond with your baby too. I mean, that's such a precious time. I mean, they're never going to be that small again. They're never going to be that sweet again, and they do sleep a lot.
And it was, for me, like, it was kind of weird. Not weird, but like with our first kid, it's like, I don't really know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, neither did I. It's so much of it is just instinct, especially with breastfeeding. It just, it's good to have my midwife who was there, who could just say, like, okay, she basically was like, get into bed and sleep with the baby, and everything will be fine. I would say the most helpful things you did for me was like run my bath and my herbal baths. Making sure your wife is fed. Don't make your wife cook when she's postpartum. We were really fortunate with our son because we were more like established in our parish that we had a meal train. I actually brought a meal to a woman today on meal train. Being a part of a parish is like it's going to change your life in just, in terms of having children and all that, but making sure you have meals. I did not prepare any meals with my daughter, and I didn't have a meal train because we weren't really in a parish yet. So we got a lot of carry out, which is not only expensive, but it's just not really that nourishing for you. So we had a lot of carry out, whereas with my son, I prepared a lot of frozen meals, and I told you how to prepare those.
Yeah, like we had, because you were making like stew and soups and
pasta, anything that you can freeze easily.
Yeah, you made a lot of stuff ahead of time, and then we froze it. But then we had a meal train, so we didn't even really end up using a lot of the frozen stuff that we had made. I think
not until you went back to work, I think, which worked out even better.
Yeah, I for the first like 2 weeks, I don't think that we cooked at all.
No,
I think that
it was wonderful.
Yeah, I think that there was a couple days where like we'd wake up and I'd make eggs for our daughter or something.
I think the first time we were really just winging it, and like I said, lots of takeout. But just bringing me my water, making sure that I had enough food, water. I was much more of a snacker with our daughter, so like I always had like a bag of jerky or something like that. Just making sure your wife is.
Well, it's probably because we weren't eating that good.
Yeah, that's true actually. Making sure your wife is really well fed, like warm, nourishing foods. Protecting her from like, if your family is like, I want to come over right now, and she might love that, she might want that, or she might not be comfortable with that. Putting up some barriers if you need to, or that kind of thing. Even
if you don't want to, like if you're, because and that's kind of the thing that I had a difficult time with our daughter, was transitioning into actually being like a father. And I think that at first it was kind of that thing where I was worried about like not having time to do what I wanted to do. Which is totally the wrong way to look at things, right? Like you're at that point, you have a new job, you have a new set of responsibilities and all that, and you knew ahead of time that it was going to happen. It's not like it just you
got 9 months to
it's not like the stork dropped it on your doorstep by mistake and now you're stuck with it. So for when we had our son, it was a lot more of tending to my daughter and making sure that she was good as well as you, and then everything else. So I think that even if your wife is very much like, I want family to come and I'm fine with them coming over, which there's things to be wary of with that, like especially because your newborn is very vulnerable to things, just like germs and bacteria and stuff. But even if you feel overwhelmed, just stand up and say, no, I don't want to do that. Like, let's just hang out together. But it was really nice when we had our son, because of how much time I got to spend with our daughter.
Yeah, that was... So if you already have kids, especially for the second one, I think realizing that toddler is your responsibility in a lot more ways really is helpful. Like I was grateful that I didn't really have to not worry. I mean, those first few days after having your second child are so overwhelming, because I felt this really overwhelming sense of guilt, like, especially because our kids are really close in age. Like, what have I done? Like, I miss my daughter so much. So just knowing that you guys got to be really close during those days, you guys went to like stores together a lot and went out on little.
Yeah, I went to story time with her. Like we went on hikes in the woods.
Yeah,
like we would go to.
Just knowing that she was really well taken care of by you made me feel a lot better, and then I could relax with our baby a lot more. It was really great, and you guys have been. I mean, you guys have always been close, but I think since then you've been just way closer, and it's really sweet. But I think going back, like if it's your first child, just recognizing how much your life has changed. Like for men and women, it's very different. Obviously, your life changes because you become a father, but as a woman, your life changes so much. Like, especially, like I said, if you're breastfeeding, you just gave birth, so your body's all different and everything. And, you know, this baby's basically attached to you 24/7. Like,
well, they don't even recognize you as something separate from them either. Like, that's a huge thing with, like, the psychology of it all, is that babies generally will say, like, dada before mama, because they don't recognize the mom as being different from them. They don't recognize them as being separate from them.
So I think you just have to really just give your life, I guess, a lot of sympathy. Like, just be very kind to your wife. I mean, I'm not saying, like, you weren't by any means. I'm just saying, like, in general, recognizing what a life-changing event just happened for your wife, and just being there for her and sitting with her, depending on, like, what you divvy up the duties with your baby, just, like, staying with her awake, even if you're doing nothing, just staying awake with her if she's up in the middle of the night with the baby, or you know, that kind of stuff is helpful. And then if you already have kids, just making sure that the older kids are just taken care of. Like, mom shouldn't really have to do anything for those older kids in those first weeks.
Yeah, and I think that for me at least, when we had our daughter, it kind of set in. It set in a little later. Sort of everything. And I remember too that because we had our daughter in the winter time, that after a couple days, maybe it was like a week, we went outside with her in the backyard, and so we have a pretty decent sized backyard, and I was holding her, and I was just walking around the yard, and it was kind of cold out, so she was like all swaddled and she was sleeping, and I was walking around in the backyard, and you were still kind of by the house, like on the back deck. And as I was walking toward the back, toward like the sort of like wooded area, I remember seeing like animal tracks on the ground in the snow, and then I saw a rabbit jumping like a bunny. And I just remember like looking down at our daughter and knowing that like I have now contributed to everything that was going on, and it was a very odd feeling. I really can't explain, and I don't think that, because I remember that one of my friends who was a dad had told me before, like, things are going to be a lot different, and you're not going to know until you know. And I didn't really know what he meant by that, obviously, because he told me I wasn't going to know. But like once that moment hit, I was like, okay, now I realize like things are different, and then. But it's not as like immediate, because for you, like as soon as you had the baby, it's like you have that connection with them. And even with our son, I think that it's a little different too, just because, you know, at that point it was like, okay, now I'm hanging out with our daughter. Like I remember after we did everything with our son to, you know, make sure everything was good and all that, I woke up our daughter to like meet our son. And it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were sitting there on our couch, just like eating apples next to each other, and just like hanging out while you were doing your thing in the bathtub, and so it was very much more of like, okay, now I need to take over the attention for our daughter, because you're splitting the attention that your toddler is getting, or your other kids, by half. So, you know, if they're getting 100% of your attention, now you're drastically dropping it in half. And so you need to make sure that they still feel good, and that they still feel like they're getting, you know, the proper care and attention and everything that they need, especially because they're in such a crucial developmental stage. So, you know, for the first 2 weeks that we had our son, I mean, the other thing too is that with newborn babies, like, I think that men don't get the same kind of connection, because there's still that thing where you look and you're like, okay, like I love this, and I've made this, and it's, you know, part of me, and all this stuff. But, you know, for the mom, you're constantly holding the baby, you're constantly, you know, breastfeeding them and swaddling them and napping with them, and you're very close to them. And I think there's definitely a different sort of like emotional connection with the baby versus with the men. So, you know, it was definitely different for me than for you. And then I remember too that after a little while after we had our son, you were like convinced that our daughter didn't like you anymore.
Yeah, that was a rough phase for sure.
Yeah, and I think that it was just a phase that she was going through in general. Like, I think that even if we didn't have our son, that she still would have been doing that. But when I had to go back to work, I remember that you were kind of struggling quite a bit with the transition to having 2 kids. And that's what I've heard people say too, is that the transition between having 1 kid to 2 kids is pretty bad, and then adding a third to it is really not that much of a difference. Like, it's not a big deal. So, you know.
Something else I've thought about too was, even if you have 0 complications, perfect birth and everything like we had, I would give your wife so much like rest, like something after our son was born, I don't remember which one, but you were like, let's go for walks and stuff. And I remember we went on one because I was feeling fine. And then like my midwife came back like that day or the next day or something for one of my checkups. And I was like laying on the couch. She goes, oh, perfect. You're exactly where you should be. Like, and basically was telling me like, don't go on any walks. Don't go anything like that. She was like, you better not be leaving the house or anything like that. And this was like a week at this point. And I was like, yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. So
I would never.
Despite how well your wife seems to be doing, just don't push it. Don't go for walks. Like, just let her, heal and recover and stay home and do all that, because like I felt great. I feel fine after I give birth, luckily. Like, this could all change. Watch me have like a horrible third birth. I don't know. But with our, I felt absolutely fine. And I think part of that is being home and resting in my own bed. But you really shouldn't push it. I mean, the more rest you have, the quicker you'll heal. And I noticed like when we would go on walks, like after a couple weeks, I would notice my pain coming back. So like, just normal afterbirth pains, because it doesn't end once the baby.
Okay, after birth.
Ew. It doesn't end once the baby's born. You have symptoms after, obviously. So don't, even if your wife seems like she's perfectly fine, don't let her get up and make dinner or any of that. Don't let her get up and entertain guests or anything like that. Just give it a few weeks of just
and
peace.
It would kind of be the same thing, like if you had just gone through kind of that big of an experience, or even if you had done like a major surgery. Like, you're not going to expect that your wife's like, all right, when are you going back to work? So it's kind of that same idea.
Yeah.
But anything else to add?
I think hopefully we covered most things. I mean, I hope this is helpful and not just as the bragging about our experiences.
Yeah. I was just talking about how good of
how great everything is. No, I really recognize that home birth isn't for everybody. You can have if your goal is to have a natural, and by natural birth, it typically means no epidural. You can have a natural birth.
Yeah, you can still have a natural birth at the hospital.
Absolutely. I have had friends who had wonderful hospital experiences. You just have to be knowledgeable and educated and know exactly what you want, because a lot of things people will say is, all that matters is that you had a healthy baby. And women are realizing that that's not it. I mean, people throw around the word trauma a lot, but birth trauma is a very real thing that sticks with women for a very long time, whether, no matter what kind of where your birth was. I mean, I could say that I have minor birth trauma, I would say, because I was kind of abandoned by my midwife. So I mean, I think about that sometimes. It makes me sad, but I had perfect birth. So in every other way, you can have the ideal birth in any situation. You just have to you have to advocate for yourself. If you don't think that you can advocate for your wife in those ways, you can hire a doula. If I had to do a hospital birth, I 100% would have a doula, because they know exactly what to do, and you can tell them what you want and all that kind of stuff. And there's ways to have a perfect hospital birth. There's ways to have a great home birth, and I'm not saying that bad home births don't happen. I know that they do, but it's just about, what kind of choices you want to make for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, there's bad home births and great hospital births, and it all does come down to figuring out if, there is risk involved with doing a home birth and all that. But I would say that overall, if you can do a home birth, I think that it should be, very heavily considered. And
I think it should be on everyone's radar. I think
Yeah.
I would like to hear every woman considering home birth as an option versus every woman automatically assuming she's going to give birth in a hospital. And I really know that is shifting and it's changing. Like,
well, even
when our
like
moms-
nurses in hospitals and stuff, nurses that work in hospitals do home births
Yeah, a
more
lot of
often than not.
When our moms were having babies, home births were never even on the radar. Like, unless you were like seriously super crunchy, like that, which is pretty rare back then. But I think it should be on everyone's radar. I think everyone should consider it and know how comfortable it can be, and just know that you can be in your own bed and not having to deal with any, like nurses will like wake you up in the middle of the night to like check your vitals. Well, right after having a baby.
Yeah.
We deserve better. You can do better than that.
Yeah, and I think too that for the guys listening to this, like if you have, if you're married to somebody and you guys want to have a kid and all that stuff, I think that it should be something talked about. And if they're against doing a home birth, I think that, I think that you shouldn't try to overly push it. You shouldn't try to get them to do something they're not comfortable doing, but you should try to figure out why they don't want to do it and see if there's any of these sort of fears that you can sort of mitigate, or just have them listen to this or whatever.
And I would say too, a lot of women will say, oh, I want my first one to be in a hospital because it's my first, just in case something goes wrong. And I really disagree with that, obviously, because I've never had a hospital birth.
You can have a great first birth and a terrible second, or third, fourth.
I really don't think having a hospital birth is a requirement for having your first birth at all. I think it almost sets you up for failure, because you're more likely to have a C-section, and then once you have a C-section, you're less likely to have vaginal births after that. So, and
can't you only have like 2 or 3 C-sections?
A lot of OBs won't do more than 3 C-sections. So, because it does increase the risk. I mean, you can die from having too many C-sections. So, I mean, if you are Catholic for the most part, or even if you just want to have a large family, you are limiting yourself by having C-sections. So that's why they can be so dangerous.
Yeah.
So I think everybody should look into it. If your wife is not into it, obviously, like you said, don't push it, because at the end of the day, she's the one having the baby. You're both having a child, but she's birthing a baby, so her comfort matters the most. But it's comfortable. It's great.
Yeah.
I definitely love it. Like, I think it's very telling that when we joined our church, we realized that like almost everybody at church home birth. So
yeah.
I thought that was really cool.
Now for the most important question.
Yeah.
What's your favorite camouflage pattern?
The chocolate chip one.
Oh, really?
No, I just like it because it's called that. What's my favorite camouflage?
I don't know. You tell me.
Multicam black.
All right, there it is.